Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Winlo, Managing Director of Emyria, ASX code EMD. Emyria is bringing together patients, clinicians, researchers, medical innovators, and investors to develop new treatments in neuroscience and mental health. To tell us more, I welcome Michael. Over to you.
Well, good morning. Thanks, David, and thanks for joining. Real pleasure to be sharing an update on our business and the really exciting work that we're doing in a field that's capturing the imagination right now, and that is psychedelic-assisted therapy. You can go to the next slide. And the one after this. Great. So Emyria's mission is to really change the standard for global mental health care. We do this with a really unique business model. We own and operate a set of clinical services that reach the nation. We invest heavily in data capture so we can learn with our patients, and we convert that data and revenues into R&D efforts to develop new treatments to tackle some of our major mental health conditions. You can go to the next slide, please. It's no question, really, no surprise that mental health is getting increasing attention as being a rising burden and cost to our health system. We also know that the capacity in the system to treat patients is really limited. 1 in 3 Australian psychologists have their books closed, and this number is actually higher for psychiatrists. And if you've ever had a loved one or a family member that you've tried to get healthcare through, with a mental health challenge, you can appreciate how difficult this can be. And so recently, there's been a tremendous amount of excitement around a new modality of treating mental health, particularly our most serious conditions. And that's psychedelic-assisted therapy. This is the administration of a psychedelic medicine given alongside skilled psychotherapy for patients. And what we're seeing from some of the most remarkable and well-run phase 3 trials is an incredible response rate in patients with major mental health challenges. Up to 80% of patients who underwent 3 sessions of MDMA-assisted therapy, patients with PTSD, had a clinically significant improvement in their symptoms, and around 70% no longer met the criteria for PTSD. So on the back of this growing body of evidence, regulators around the world are shifting their stance on these treatments, and Australia, believe it or not, is leading the world. In February this year, they announced legislation change to allow MDMA and psilocybin to be legal medicines prescribable by specially qualified specialists from July 1st this year for MDMA for PTSD and psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. Go to the next slide, please. So this puts Australia about a year ahead of the rest of the world on this. Now, Emyria's focus for the last couple of years, we've been working with partners to develop a model for MDMA-assisted therapy alongside our other clinical service efforts. MDMA, worth telling you a little bit about this. This is a really unique drug. We know this as ecstasy on the street, but I should mention that the ecstasy that you could get from your man on the street is quite commonly mislabeled and cut with other things. So what we're talking about here is medical grade, pharmaceutical grade MDMA. MDMA has these unique qualities in that it greatly releases serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline, the 3 primary neurotransmitters. And this leads to a really unique set of clinical features. It increases a sense of well-being and trust, sociability and extroversion. One stays alert and lucid, and it also decreases feelings of fear and defensiveness. And those qualities make it a very powerful adjunct for psychotherapy, particularly when you're dealing with really difficult subject matter like post-traumatic stress disorder. We can go to the next slide, please. And so MDMA is showing most promise for conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a challenge, a debilitating mental health condition that can occur following a traumatic event or a series of repeated exposures to difficult or challenging environment. It can lead to these set of debilitating symptoms that can affect quality of life and people's ability to function normally. The current treatment options are relatively broad, but there's very high rates of resistance. About 50% of patients develop a resistance to these common treatment options, and about 50% of patients also end up developing complex or severe PTSD. We can go to the next slide, please. So given in this backdrop, it's been incredibly promising to see some of the results from well-run large phase 3 studies conducted in the United States using MDMA-assisted therapy for patients with complex and severe PTSD. And what we've now seen from 2 major phase 3 trials is some incredible clinical outcomes. 86% of the most recent phase 3 completed and results released just last week showed that participants reported improvement compared to just 69% in the placebo group. Remarkably, though, 71% of participants in that MDMA-assisted therapy treatment arm no longer met the criteria for PTSD, compared to just 46% in the therapy-only group. And it's results like that that are capturing the imagination and prompting countries like Australia and soon to be the rest of the world to change their attitudes towards these treatments and to work with clinical partners like Emyria to figure out how can we get these treatments to patients who need them. If you go to the next slide, please. So Emyria's focus is on complex mental health disorders. We've treated a broad range of patients. We have a special interest in the anxiety disorders and with MDMA-assisted therapy focused very much on PTSD. How big can this market get? Well, just in Australia alone, there's about 1 million Australians suffering or experiencing PTSD in the last 12 months. About half of those have complex or treatment-resistant PTSD. And if we look at potential exclusions, we're still talking about 400,000 Australians that could be suitable for MDMA-assisted therapy. And if we started with just a very small percentage of those, we're looking at hundreds to thousands of patients that could have treatment, and that's our target group over the next year or so. You can go to the next slide, please. So what's needed today? Well, to deliver these treatments, we need the approval of an ethics committee, we need a special care model, we need specially qualified specialists, the support of a multidisciplinary team, fit for purpose clinics, and secure drug supply. And Emyria has all of that in place. If you think about what's needed tomorrow, though, we're going to need innovators in both delivery of care, new delivery models, but also improvements to the medications are quite likely to improve patient access and suitability. And so Emyria's unique set of capabilities that we've been developing over the last 4 years, we run clinical services, we invest in data, we also have our in-house drug development team. We're uniquely set up to really lead and pioneer in this sector. Next slide, please. And so what's needed today? Well, we have a broad clinical service, which I'll explain in a moment, that allows us to have immediate patient impact, generate revenues and data that then can support the improvement of both these drugs and their delivery models. The data can also support cost-effective analysis and engagement with payers. And then if we look, we can then scale this through acquisitions, growth of our clinical services, but also our drug development programs, hold the promise of large venture returns through licenses and drug development deals. Next slide, please. So our clinical service footprint is quite broad. For many years, we've been running Emerald Clinics, a specialist GP-led service working with recently rescheduled cannabinoid medicines. We've treated more than 10,000 patients and have a very rich and deep data set that's also guided our own development of unique proprietary dose forms in the cannabinoid front. Recently, we acquired the PAC Center, a brilliant multidisciplinary clinical team specialized in the treatment and care of patients with psychological trauma. And so we have now added into our clinical service arm and broadened our clinical service footprint. We now work with psychiatrists, GPs, mental health nurses, psychologists, counselors, physical, social, and occupational therapists as well. And so we have a really broad clinical reach and the ideal wraparound clinical service to provide these promising and pioneering new treatments like MDMA-assisted therapy and more. You can go to the next slide, please. And by having that broad clinical service, we're now able to guide and ground our drug development programs based on the real-world data and real patient experience. For the last couple of years, we've been working in partnership with the University of Western Australia to make changes to that MDMA molecule to create MDMA analogs, a whole library of unique chemical entities for which we believe have promise for a whole range of neuropsychiatric conditions. We have 3 lead series which are progressing well. One series focused on making a shorter acting MDMA so we can turn that 10 or 12-hour treatment session into something more manageable and practical in a busy clinical practice. We have a lead series focused on tuning the selectivity of MDMA for specific neurotransmitters, and we're showing some great promise for the treatment of the symptoms of Parkinson's medication. And we also have other lead series focused on other specific neurotransmitter focused conditions, including some for fibrosis, given a specific action on the serotonin receptor. We'll go to the next slide, please. we've done this before because we've also had a history of developing proprietary cannabinoid dose forms based on our real-world data. We have 3 lead programs that are all in clinical stages, RX5 in phase 3 trials, and commercially partnered with Aspen Pharmacare Australia, pursuing an over-the-counter indication. And RX7 and 9 are a higher bioavailability, high-potency dose forms, pursuing prescription indications, and they're in research programs with the National Institutes of Health. Go to the next slide, please. And so here's our business model. We run care delivery, treat thousands of patients with a broad clinical service. We also have a world-class data platform, allows us to learn from our patients. That provides a really solid foundation to do our drug development work, provides revenues and data, which then we put into our drug development programs. Next slide, please. And so we have multiple revenue streams through our clinical service arms, patient fees through clinical partners and licenses, but also opportunities to grow that through our other efforts as well. Final couple of slides, and then I can get into questions here. Obviously, we couldn't have such an ambitious plan without a really world-class global team of experts across care delivery, technology and data, and drug development. We go to the next slide, please. And that allows us, and also we've got a really terrific track record of accomplishment, caring for patients, doing drug development, making real patient impact, generating substantial revenues, and of course, growing this model nationally. Final slides, we can put a couple more here, got some milestone slides I encourage you to look at. And then finally, on the final slide coming up after this one here, just our key investment highlights here. Australia has the unique regulatory environment with changes like what's happening with psilocybin for a company like Emyria to exist and thrive. We're at the forefront of this pioneering new field of psychedelic-assisted therapy. We've done it before with cannabinoids. We've also got a number of unique drug assets that we're developing alongside our clinical service ambitions as well, and a terrific team to pull it all together. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Michael. And we'll leave it on that slide just so that people can take that in while we do deal with a couple of questions. So I've got a crackers coming actually.
Okay.
With the analogy of cell shovels during a gold rush, when regarding psychedelic therapy, what aspect do you consider to be most equivalent to the shovel? Is it the current treatment, the supply manufacture of the medication, IP, or TGA, FDA approval for alternative treatments?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple of shovels needed here, and that's what makes this challenging. We need trained therapists. So there's some. Well, let's think through where the bottlenecks might be. One is, clinical teams are actually equipped and capable of doing this. So they need trained therapists. We need clinical services where there's the right combination of talent, psychiatrists and therapists co-working together to deliver these treatments. We also need secure drug supply as well. I think the drug supply will eventually become a commodity. I think the real challenge now will be in those clinical services. And so tooling up, allowing other clinicians who want to participate and get active into this space, rapidly get skilled up and supported to provide this treatment is really where the key is. We saw that at the PAC Center. That's why we initially partnered with them 2 years ago. They needed what we had, which was skills with data, clinical trial design, drug management. And so I feel that we can play a really important role activating other clinical services in this space.
Just touching on the PAC Center, you recently acquired them, as you mentioned. What does that indicate, that acquisition indicate about the company's trajectory for both immediate impact and long-term global influence?
Yeah. So we really believe that the right way to provide these treatments is have the full suite of clinical services, the wraparound care model, because patients won't just come for psychedelics. We saw this in cannabis too. It's not just about giving patients access to a single treatment. It's about caring for their condition, treating their PTSD, treating their treatment-resistant depression, for example. They want to be well. They don't just want access to a single modality. So we want to be there before, during, and after the experimental treatments. And so PAC Center is our chance to create that wraparound model. We think that's the right kind of model to both prove the value of where these treatments sit in the care paradigm, for getting cost-effectiveness data, ultimately for engaging payers, which then can show that commercial model could work. So we want to show this clinical service model works, have it thriving, and then scale it nationally and hopefully internationally beyond that.
Thanks, Michael. We are out of time, unfortunately, but a great presentation and clearly a company to watch. So I'd urge investors to scan the QR code to jump in the Investor Hub and get more information about Emyria and what you're up to. Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.